My name is Ethan, and I'm 42 now. This happened when I was very young. I think I was around 5 years old. But it's one of those memories that never faded. Probably because even back then, I knew something about it was wrong. I just didn't have the words for it yet. My parents had separated not long before that night. I didn't really understand what that meant at the time. I just knew my dad didn't live with us anymore, and it was just my mom and me in a new place. We lived in a small ground-floor apartment on the edge of a quiet residential area, the kind of neighborhood where nothing ever seemed to happen. No loud parties, no sirens at night, just rows of identical buildings, trimmed grass, and neighbors who nodded politely but didn't stop to talk. It was supposed to be safe. That's why my mom chose it. The apartment itself was small. Everything connected through a narrow hallway. The bathroom, my room, my mom's room, and the living area at the front. From one end of the hallway, you could see almost the entire place. My bedroom was technically mine, but most nights I didn't sleep there. I had nightmares back then, a lot of them, and my mom never forced me to sleep alone. If I got scared, I could crawl into her bed, no questions asked. So most nights, I fell asleep next to her. That night was no different. It was summer. Hot enough that leaving the windows open felt necessary. The air barely moved, and the apartment always felt warmer at night, like it was holding on to the heat from the day. I remember the living room window was cracked open just a little. Thin curtains hung over it, lifting slightly whenever a breeze came through. Before going to bed, my mom did what she always did. She checked the front door. I remember the sound of the lock clicking, then the deadbolt. That sound mattered to me. It meant the outside stayed outside. Not long after that, I fell asleep. Sometime during the night, I woke up. I don't know what caused it. Maybe it was the heat. Maybe I felt something. I just remember opening my eyes in the dark. The apartment was quiet in that deep, heavy way it only gets when everyone else is asleep. Not peaceful, just still. I sat up slightly. Part of me knew I should lie back down and go back to sleep, but I couldn't. Something felt off, even if I didn't understand why. That's when I noticed the dog. We had a small dog back then. He was old and calm, and he spent most of his time asleep on the rug near the couch in the living room. But when I looked toward the hallway, he wasn't there. Instead, I saw him standing at the edge of the corridor, frozen, staring toward my bedroom. He wasn't growling, he wasn't barking, he wasn't moving at all. At 5 years old, I didn't think danger. I thought he needed to go outside. I whispered his name. He didn't react. I whispered it again, a little louder. Still nothing. After a few seconds, he slowly backed away from the hallway. He didn't turn around. He didn't take his eyes off whatever he was looking at. His nails made a faint clicking sound against the floor as he stepped backward. Then he disappeared into the living room. The clicking stopped. That's when I felt uneasy. I turned toward my mom and gently shook her arm. She stirred, half asleep, mumbling something I couldn't understand. I whispered that I heard something. She opened her eyes, still unfocused, and asked me what I meant. But before I could answer, she stopped. She sat up slightly, and immediately I could tell something had changed. Her expression shifted from tired confusion to alertness in a split second. She didn't say a word. She just raised her finger to her lips, signaling for me to stay quiet. I obeyed. We both looked toward the hallway. She was listening, really listening, trying to understand what she was hearing, or what she wasn't hearing. Slowly, carefully, she began to move out of bed. I watched her closely. Seeing the way she reacted made me scared. I felt like crying, but I didn't. The way she stayed so serious told me this wasn't the kind of moment where I should make noise. So I stayed silent and watched. That's when I saw it. There was a shape near my bedroom door, a dark outline that didn't belong there. At first, my brain tried to explain it away. A shadow, a trick of the light, something harmless. Then it shifted slightly, and I understood. It was a man. He was standing just outside my bedroom, partially turned away, like he'd already decided to leave. I could see his shoulders, his back, the outline of his head. My mind tried to make sense of it, but nothing fit. In the quietest way possible, he stepped away from my doorway and moved toward the living room. His footsteps were slow and deliberate, and even in the dark, it felt like he knew exactly where he was going, like he'd walked through the apartment before. That thought terrified me more than anything else. My mom didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She moved. In one motion, she grabbed me under my arms and pulled me out of bed. She didn't bother with shoes. She carried me down the short hallway toward the back of the apartment, her breathing fast but controlled. She pushed open the back door and set me down outside, on the grass just beyond the small concrete step. Then she followed immediately, slamming the door behind her and locking it from the outside. That was when she started screaming. She yelled for help, for anyone. Her voice echoed between the buildings, sharp and terrified. Lights began turning on around us. Doors opened. Someone shouted that they were calling the police. We stayed outside, barefoot and shaking, until patrol cars arrived. The police searched the apartment thoroughly. Every room, every closet. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no damaged locks. The front door was unlocked. That was their conclusion. My mom argued with them. She insisted she had locked it, deadbolt and latch. She always did. She was meticulous about it. But the officers were calm, professional, and unconvinced. They said the man must have come in through the front door and left the same way. Before leaving, one of them suggested installing better locks. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. About a week later, my mom was cleaning the apartment during the day while I was at a neighbor's place. She decided to reorganize a small utility closet near the kitchen, a narrow space we rarely opened. When she pushed the door open, something fell out. A folded piece of paper. Inside were crude drawings, lines, shapes, names written over and over again, including hers. There were also old food wrappers and a pair of worn gloves shoved into the corner. The police came back. They took everything, asked questions, wrote notes. But without fingerprints, witnesses, or proof of how long those things had been there wasn't much they could do. One officer said something that still makes my skin crawl. He suggested the man may have been inside the apartment before that night, hiding, waiting. We moved shortly after. Different neighborhood, different locks, different habits. But even now, decades later, I can't sleep with doors open. I can't relax when a room behind me is dark. And whenever I wake up in the middle of the night for no clear reason, I remember the dog standing silently in the hallway, and I wonder how long that man had been watching us before we ever saw him. My name is Claire, and I grew up in a town so small it barely felt real. One blinking traffic light, one grocery store, one ice cream shop with a hand-painted sign that said, "Open," even when it wasn't. About 600 people, give or take. And somehow, everyone knew everyone else's dog before they knew their last name. When my sister and I were little, 5 and 6 maybe, we were allowed to roam. Not far, but far enough. Parents didn't hover. Doors stayed unlocked. If you yelled loud enough, someone's mom would hear you and tell you to knock it off. Looking back now, that kind of freedom feels reckless. Back then, it felt normal. There was a man who lived 2 houses down from us. His name was Mr. Henson. I didn't think much of him at first. None of us did. In a town that small, you didn't really meet people. You just knew they existed. Mr. Henson was one of those people. He waved when we passed, smiled a little too long maybe, but people smiled longer in small towns. That was how you showed you belonged, how you proved you weren't a stranger. Sometimes when my mom was working late, he'd stop us while we were playing in the street, just casually. "Hey," he'd say, like he'd just remembered something important. "You girls want ice cream?" We always did. He never asked our mom, never told her. He'd just walk us to the ice cream shop like it was the most natural thing in the world. He'd buy us cones, then sit on a bench nearby and watch us eat. I remember thinking he was generous. I remember thinking he was kind. I also remember how he never ate anything himself. At the time, that didn't mean anything. Some adults just didn't like sweets. That was my explanation. Kids are good at explaining things away when no one tells them otherwise. He'd watch us the whole time, smiling, asking if it was good. It always was. Years passed. We moved houses but stayed in town. Same streets, same routines. By the time I was in 7th grade, my sister and I were older, more independent, and a little more cautious. That was when the stranger danger videos finally reached our school assemblies. Don't talk to strangers. Don't accept gifts. Trust your instincts. It all sounded obvious. Mr. Henson still lived nearby. He was probably in his early 40s then. Clean clothes, friendly voice, always outside, always watching the street like he was waiting for something to happen. I ran into him one afternoon while walking home from school. He was sitting on his front lawn in a folding chair, an American flag draped over the armrest. My mom would have loved that. Our house was practically painted red, white, and blue year-round. Flags, decorations, framed photos of parades. He knew that. "Hey," he called out. "I'm having a red, white, and blue sale in my backyard. Thought you might want to check it out." I stopped walking. Something tightened in my chest. I didn't know why. He hadn't done anything wrong. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't blocking my way. But I didn't step closer. "Oh, I said, buying time. "I need to get money first." "That's fine," he replied, too quickly. "I'll be here." I nodded and kept walking. When I got home, my dad was there. That surprised me. He usually worked late. He took one look at me and asked what was wrong. He said I looked pale. I told him everything. About the sale. About the backyard. About the way my skin felt wrong just thinking about it. I remember feeling stupid as I talked, like I was overreacting, like I was wasting his time. He didn't interrupt me. When I finished, he just said, "Okay." Then he grabbed his hat and we walked back together. Mr. Henson was still outside. His smile flickered when he saw I wasn't alone. Just for a second, but I noticed it. "Oh," he said. "Didn't know you'd be bringing company." "Just wanted to see the sale," my dad replied calmly. They went into the backyard, and there really were items there. Cheap things. Flags, ribbons, plastic decorations, red, white, and blue everywhere. It looked like someone had tried too hard to make it feel harmless. For a moment, I wondered if I'd been wrong, if my dad would think I'd imagined it. But even standing there, the feeling didn't go away. We didn't stay long. That night, my dad called the police. He didn't tell me at the time. I only learned years later. I do remember him talking quietly with my mom for a long time while I pretended not to listen. After that, My mom insisted I walk home on the opposite side of the street. She never explained why. 2 years later, Mr. Henson was arrested for attempting to lure a child into his house. No one acted surprised. That's the part that still bothers me. People shook their heads, said things like, "I always thought something was off," or, "Yeah, that figures." Years later, out of curiosity, I looked him up. Public records, old news articles, mugshots. That's when my stomach dropped. One report mentioned previous concerns, mentions of children, mentions of ice cream. I still think about those ice cream trips sometimes. How safe they felt. How ordinary. How no one thought to question a nice man buying treats for kids in a town where everyone trusted everyone else. I think about how close danger can look to kindness, and how often it wears a smile, holds a cone, and waits for you to follow it somewhere quiet. Because in small towns, the scariest thing isn't the stranger. It's the neighbor everyone thinks they know. My name is Mark, and last year I had just gone through a divorce. Nothing dramatic, nothing explosive. Just the kind of ending where you stop arguing because you're too tired to keep explaining yourself. I wasn't looking for a fresh start or some big change. I just wanted to stay quiet for a while. Somewhere I could exist without being noticed. Somewhere neutral. So when I moved into that house, the first thing I noticed was how well it was kept. Clean siding, fresh paint, a narrow driveway without cracks, a small front yard that looked like someone had taken care of it recently, even if no one had lived there for a while. There was nothing strange about it. No boarded windows, no overgrown grass, no warning signs that made you stop and think twice. It looked like any other house on an ordinary street. Quiet, unremarkable, and easy to overlook. That was exactly why I chose it. On the first afternoon, while I was unloading boxes from my car, I noticed the man who lived next door. His name was Thomas Hale. He stood on his porch, leaning against the railing with his arms crossed. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just watched me, like I was interrupting something he'd been waiting to finish. After a minute, he spoke. "Careful with that hallway behind the kitchen," he said. "It's narrower than it looks. If you stack boxes there, the door sticks." I laughed quietly, more out of reflex than amusement. It was a strange comment. Stranger still because I hadn't mentioned any hallway. I hadn't even stepped inside yet. "Oh," I said, forcing my voice into something polite. "Thanks. I'll keep that in mind." He nodded once, slowly, like I'd just confirmed something he already knew. Then he went back inside. I stood there longer than I needed to. I told myself it was nothing. Neighbors talked. People remembered houses better than people. Maybe Thomas had helped the landlord at some point. Maybe he'd lived there years ago. All reasonable explanations. Still, once I stepped inside, the hallway caught my attention immediately. It ran behind the kitchen, narrow and slightly angled, leading to a small laundry room at the back of the house. The walls were scuffed, like furniture had been dragged through there more times than I could count. I remembered what Thomas had said, and I didn't like how accurate it was. That night, lying in bed, I heard a soft tapping sound. Not loud, not rhythmic, just occasional taps. One tap, then silence, then another, far enough apart that I almost convinced myself I imagined it. I told myself it was the house settling. Old places made noise. That was normal. I was already half asleep and the sound wasn't strong enough to pull me out of bed. Eventually, I fell asleep thinking about unpacking. The next morning, I ran into Thomas again while checking the mailbox. "Did you hear it last night?" he asked casually. "Hear what?" I said. "The tapping," he replied. "Usually starts after midnight." My stomach tightened. I thought it was pipes. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's what everyone thinks at first. After that, I started noticing how much Thomas seemed to know. He warned me not to use the light switch in the laundry room because it flickered sometimes. Mentioned a loose floorboard near the back bedroom. Told me the bathroom mirror wasn't original, that it had been replaced after what he called an incident. I never asked him to explain. I also didn't tell him what I'd found on my own. I discovered the small door on my 4th day in the house. It was hidden behind the pantry shelves. Not locked, not sealed. Just there, like something no one bothered to deal with properly. Behind it was a narrow space between the walls, barely wide enough to stand in. There was nothing inside, no wiring, no storage. Just scratch marks on the wood, thin, uneven, some deep, some faded. I stared at them longer than I should have, then closed the door and pushed the shelves back into place. I didn't tell anyone. A few days later, I mentioned the door to Thomas without thinking. His expression changed immediately. "You weren't supposed to find that yet," he said. Then, almost instantly, he corrected himself. "I mean, most people don't." I laughed awkwardly. Why would it even be there? He hesitated before answering. "Older houses were built strangely," he said. "Sometimes for airflow, sometimes for reasons people don't talk about." That night, the tapping came back. Louder this time. Closer. It sounded like it was coming from inside the walls. I didn't sleep much after that. Over the next few weeks, something else started to bother me. Thomas seemed to know my routine before I did. He commented on nights I stayed up late, mentioned mornings I left earlier than usual. Once, he brought up a phone call I'd had in my living room. "You sounded upset," he said. "Around 9 last night." I stared at him. My windows were closed. "I have good hearing," he replied. That was when I started locking everything. Doors, windows, even the pantry. One afternoon I came home and noticed the pantry door slightly open. Nothing was missing. But when I moved the shelves, the small hidden door behind them was ajar. I didn't touch it. I didn't go inside. I just pushed the shelves back and sat on the couch, staring at the wall, waiting for my breathing to slow down. That evening, Thomas knocked on my door. "I saw the pantry light on," he said. "You should turn it off. It attracts attention." "Attention from who?" I asked. He paused, didn't answer. A week later, Thomas was gone. No goodbye, no moving truck, no explanation. The house next door sat empty, curtains drawn, mail piling up. I felt relief, real relief. But the noises didn't stop. They got worse. The tapping turned into scratching. The scratching turned into slow movement, like someone carefully shifting their weight inside the walls. One night, around 2 in the morning, I heard 3 slow taps. Not on the front door, on the wall behind my bed. I didn't answer. The next morning I called the landlord. Her name was Mrs. Keller. I asked about the man who had been living next door. There was a long pause on the line. "Are you sure someone was living there recently?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "For years." "That house hasn't been officially occupied in over 6 months," she replied. My body went cold. "Then, who was my neighbor?" "Thomas Hale." Another pause. "He used to live in your house," she said quietly. "Before you." "Why did he leave?" She exhaled slowly. "Because he claimed the noises wouldn't stop." She hesitated, then added, "Have you heard anything unusual too?" I didn't answer. Instead, I asked her to describe Thomas Hale, just physically. What she described didn't match the man I knew. Not his height, not his build, not even his age. I moved out 2 weeks later. I never told anyone about the small door, or the tapping, or the knock behind the wall, or Thomas Hale. I never found out if it was some kind of cruel joke, a warning I misunderstood, or something worse. All I know is that it was the strangest experience I've ever had. And sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I still hear it. Not coming from this house, but from somewhere closer. Like someone already knows the layout of this place too.